All right, well, let's start. So I hope you've enjoyed the study. Tim and I have really enjoyed sort of reading this together with between the Buber and the Cassuto texts and some of the Jewish study Bible stuff we've done. You may have noticed we enjoy the nerdy, granular stuff, but I think tonight's really going to be an interesting conversation, and I hope that it's that. I hope it's a conversation and not something that's just a dump of information. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think is really important for our, and I say our because it's plural, our religious traditions. It's not just about Judaism or Christianity, but this idea of the giving of a law or a way of living, or instructions is really important if we think about our values and our commitments that we share within a community. And I love this little nugget here by Martin Buber, because he starts by saying that great is the work of the saga, right? This idea of this everlasting story, this timeless story. And it thrills our hearts, yes, but that, however, should not prevent us from penetrating wherever possible beyond the veil of legend, and as far as we can, viewing the pure from which it conceals. And in a nutshell, without the academic speak here, Buber is just saying, yes, the saga is important. These stories are important. However, the story itself should not prevent us from being able to get into something that is relevant for us even today, that beyond the legend and beyond the things that we get hung up on, the details, whether or not it even happened, realizing the truth, the value, the life that is in these stories. So here we are at the big event. Tim alluded to it last week with the last slide, but here we are. And this part of the Exodus story plays a role of decisive importance, not only in the history of Israel, but in humanity as a whole. If we think about all of the people that would call themselves religious, or even more so, those that don't think they're religious but are impacted or influenced by religious ideas, this is very important. It has shaped billions of people's lives, and regardless of, I think sometimes in my worst in my worst day or moment, and when I want to rail against religion as a whole, I realize that regardless of how we feel about it from any given moment, religion is an idiom by which we all speak. It's cultural, it's sociocultural, it's political, it's embedded in how we live our lives. And so I know a lot of people are atheist or anti-theist, and think that perhaps the greatest thing that we could do is just rid the world of religion. Friends, I honestly believe that even if we ridded the world of religion, we would find another reason to argue, to fight, to disagree, and to make borders and others. And so I think that this big event is really important, and it shapes us. And some of those arguments miss the point, and that is, how do we deal with ideas of God or the divine or the transcendent, and how we should be with one another? This is really a big event that shapes many religious traditions, and was itself shaped by other religious traditions. And so this really is sort of the apex of the Exodus story. Yes, God brings people out of liberation, or out of bondage into liberation, or into a land that they have yet to see and some won't see. But this event really teaches how it is that God is to be in covenant with the community, and how the community is to be in covenant with one another and with God. And oftentimes I think this is more like the, actually, hold on one second. I need to share sound. What an amateur this guy is. Hold on one second. Here we go. I think too often when we think about what are called the 10 Commandments or the Decalogue or the 10 sayings, this is kind of the image we get of Yahweh. Oh, this is a big fail. It's not working. Come on. Give me 1 second here. Oh. Anyways, I embedded this and it did not work. Long story short, it's Gandalf. If you don't know, Lord of the Rings, and he has this great big moment with a sword in one hand and staff in the other hand, and he says, "You shall not pass," right? And so we have this image of a God that's, first of all, white with a big beard and, sort of quasi angry and very old. But it's this idea that, you shall not pass. There's like all this pinned up anger or energy. And this is kind of what religion can, or God can represent, this angry old man telling you what you can't do. When in fact, it's much, 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 much more nuanced and complicated than that. Because what is really happening here is in the Exodus story in general, and in the giving of the law, the Torah in particular, there's actually a new conception of the divine and a spiritual revelation going on. Yes, the early Israelites were influenced by ancient Near East religions, traditions, theologies, covenants, whatever. But this Exodus story is actually very unique in that this twofold unfolding, the revelation of Yahweh as the Lord your God, and then consequently or subsequently the giving of the law or the covenant to the people that says that this God is not just uninterested or apart or above or beyond the people, but in the midst of the people. And the way that this God is in the midst of the people is through the law, in giving of the law, which is the terms of the covenant of being with one another. And it's interesting because the word Torah comes from the Hebrew word, and it simply means to guide. And so these are steps, these are ideas, these are contractual agreements between this divine reality and a community that says, this is, I brought you out of Egypt into a land that I will show you, and I'm going to guide you. And here's a Torah. I'm going to guide you. And what's interesting is that this idea of God is, we've talked a lot about God being elemental, and I believe that. However, God can also control the elements. And so God is not only elemental, but God is able to differentiate God's self from the elements. Whereas the other gods are maybe just on the fire and mountain, this Yahweh can be in the fire and not in the fire. And so there's really this transcendental gap. There's this transcendental view of a God that is completely other and above and unfathomable and ineffable, and yet at the same time wants to be in community and in covenant with us, or with the people. And so while no creature can transcend the barrier between creator and created, this Yahweh seems to be there and not there, inviting people into this divine mystery. So I said this. So yes, God is elemental. We've talked about it since Pentecost, that the Spirit is elemental in water and wind and fire and earth, but also trans-elemental. So many things are regarded as manifestations of God. And Buber says that it is impossible to know for certain where or wherein Yahweh will appear next. And so I love this. So there's almost this capriciousness about God, that God can be, yes, in the bush that is burning but not consumed or destroyed, and yet then God cannot be. And God could be here or could not be somewhere else in that same form. And so it's almost like God cannot be captured. God cannot be conquered. God cannot be fully pinned down. And thinking about Yahweh, I will be who I will be. This idea of I shall be present, howsoever I shall be present. I love that because it leaves the mystery open-ended. And I think there's something powerful there that oftentimes in the ways that we encounter the divine, we tend to get stuck in a rut or think that this is exactly what God is like or God is. And then God is not in that. It's like always this endless mystery. It's almost like hide and seek a little bit of hiddenness and then manifestation. So here we are at the Decalogue, which is just a fancy way of deca meaning 10, log 10 Ten Commandments. And so this is the climax of the entire book. Not to say that from here on out it's downhill, but this really is a very big deal, not only in the Jewish tradition, but in the Christian tradition. And as I said earlier, in many traditions. So everything's been building to this moment, and everything will thus be changed after it. So here we are. And what I want to do tonight is I want to walk us through what is often called the 10 Commandments, or which is really in Hebrew, it's better 10 sayings or 10 words. And then we'll just have, I'll try to leave some room for questions. And then we'll have, if we want to have some discussion, and then we will probably end a little early tonight, if that's okay with everyone. So the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments, the 10 words, the 10 sayings, they begin with Yahweh reminding the people of what Yahweh has done. I am the Lord your God, and in Hebrew it's Yahweh Eloheinu. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So from the drop, this Yahweh, this God, begins the covenant or treaty with the idea that, hey, I'm the Lord your God, not saying there aren't other gods, but I'm the Lord your God who did this for you. And that is sort of the preamble or the conditions on which the covenant will unfold. Hey, I have this agreement that I want to run by you. And as it starts by me saying, hey, this is what I've done for you, and this is who I am to you. And that's really powerful, and it's really important, because it's not some random God coming in, but it's a God that is involved in Israel's history, and that is active in Israel's history. And so the 10 Commandments are not based on, you should do this to be a good person, or you shouldn't do this to be a good person. They really are based on a God that is involved in history. And that is important. And friends, feel free to interject or to ask a question. I'm happy to be interrupted, and we can talk. So I've split these into two slides, okay? And we'll just walk through them. So 10 Commandments, Decalogue, 10 sayings or words. I like 10 sayings the best, but feel free to adopt whatever language you feel most comfortable with. So here we are. We've moved from God saying, all right, this is who I am. This is what I've done. We're very aware that this God is trans-elemental, meaning cannot really be imaged or locked down into an image, and that God will be in everything or nothing. And so here we are, building out of this mystery, building some type of covenant. And so Yahweh first says, I'm the Lord your God. And so really, a lot of people consider I am the Lord your God as the first commandment, and not you shall have no other gods before me. And so while it's not technically a commandment, it is a proclamation that announces who Yahweh is. And in the Jewish tradition, it actually is embraced that I am the Lord your God, that it is actually part of the first commandment and part of the 10 sayings, because it is the saying on which all others depend. And so because of what God has done for the people, here we are, you shall have no other gods before me. So there is no reason, there's no reason to worship God out of fear or out of dread or out of obligation, perhaps like other people's gods. Rather, the people can worship God out of love and gratitude because of what Yahweh has done for the people. And so I think that's important, right? That this idea of you shall have no other gods before me, and then for. And so you get sort of a prohibitive statement, and then you get an explanation. And I'll talk about later how those change in the second half of the Decalogue. But you shall have no other gods before me. Why? Because I'm the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt and into a land that I will show you, a promised land. So don't fear God in the sense that you're terrified, but love God. Be grateful that God brought you out and is bringing you into a new land. And then, like we talked about earlier, you shall not make for yourself an idol. God refuses, Yahweh refuses to be pinned down, refuses to take a particular image. And so what we see here is that when an image becomes, when we make an image, it becomes not final, but it becomes concretized, or it becomes static. And as we're learning, Yahweh will be who Yahweh will be. And so you should not make for yourself an idol. Can y'all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was getting a little weird clippy thing on my end. I just wanted to make sure we're doing okay. The third commandment, you shall not make wrongful use of the Lord your God, for, it goes on. What's interesting here is I don't know about y'all, and this might be a good point to stop and just say, hey, what do you think? But you always hear, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. And for the longest time, I always thought that was me. That meant that you couldn't say God. Oh my God. What do y'all think? Did y'all grow up like that, or have any experience like that?
Yeah. It was like, don't swear, but this has much more context to it. To not make wrongful use of the name, to not invoke the name of God for ends that are not necessarily godly.
Yes.
Is how I see this here.
Yes, that's exactly right. Anybody else have anything they want to add to that? Yeah, so I love this. So it's like, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God and use it wrongfully, or for one of the translations says for unreality, in general, for any worthless practice. So for me, that completely changes this idea. It's not about saying like, oh my God, I have to say gosh, oh my gosh, right? And that's how I grew up. But really, it's about using the name of Yahweh or God, or your God, in a way that conflicts with who God is. And in that sense, I actually think, ironically, a lot of people use God's name in vain.
I agree.
Right? It's like, if you use God for hate, you're using God's name in vain. If you use God's name to bash gay people, guess what? You're using God's name in vain. And so ironically, the people that would perhaps be the most that would say, oh my gosh, or whatever, perhaps might actually be the ones that are using God's name in vain, or for a wrongful use.
That's really, that's not this is not the interpretation or the literal interpretation that I grew up with, for sure. But just reading this interpretation right away, it seems like, we got it wrong.
Exactly.
Growing
Almost
up.
like, you shall not, like, I feel like 2 and 3 are connected. Like, you shall not make this God that isn't God. And you shouldn't make an idol of this hateful, unaffirming, small-minded God. And when you do, you're using God's name in vain. But like, if you're using God's name for love and for these other things, and for that's different. And so, like, whether or not you say, oh my God, or oh my gosh, that's kind of beside the point. So I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it.
I think that it just occurred to me too, that when we use God in other ways, that we're forgetting that I feel like there's power in God's name.
Oh, yes.
So that we want to sort of reserve that for.
Absolutely.
Not for winning the lottery or winning the football game.
Right. I just want to thank God. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Bobby. It's one of those things where, and I'm not Jewish, but for my Jewish friends, that won't say the name God, that will write G/D or say Adonai instead of Yahweh because the name is so holy, you don't want to say it. It actually makes sense. So I think you're right. It's like, we don't want to invoke God's name for things that are A, not godlike, or B, sort of trivial, right? Like, there needs to be some reverence there. And of course, it's up to us to determine. But I think that's more what this is getting at than don't say OMG or GD or whatever, right? And then here at the fourth commandment, we have remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And this is important because Sabbath is a holy day, and it's exalted over all other 6 days because practicing Sabbath reveals the primary purpose of recognizing and attesting that Yahweh is the creator of the world. So when we practice Sabbath, it's not because God said we had to, but it's in that practicing the Sabbath and saying it's holy or sacred, we are acknowledging that God created the world, and God, as the scriptures tell us, rested. That there were 7 days. God works 6, but the Sabbath day is holy, and God rests. God stops and enjoys the creation and enjoys the day. And I think that is so antithetical to how we live our lives, to how we work, to our culture. But there's something powerful there about reclaiming this in time, to say the Sabbath day is set apart. It's holy. It's sacred. I'm going to break the cycle of capitalist production. I'm going to break the cycle of longing and whatever to-do lists. And instead, I'm going to stop because I acknowledge that God brought all of this into being, and God self rested. Then there's the 5th one. This one's tougher for me. I don't know about y'all. But honor thy father and thy mother. It's interesting to me that this is in here, but it's the so is honor your father and mother so your days will be long. And my parents used to always tell me, like, yeah, honor us or else we'll like end you, basically, which is not a helpful joke to make. But I think there's something to be said about honoring as best we can those that have given us life. But I also want to acknowledge here in this that for some of us, our families of origin aren't set up in a way that we can sometimes honoring our father and our mother, our parents, may not be sort of blind obedience, but it actually may be setting of boundaries and loving, but at the same time taking care of ourselves. So I do want to name that. This is not some like universal commandment to like just do whatever your parents say regardless of how they treat you. That's not the case. Okay. So
But it have been, I'm sorry, I thought you were closing on that note, Tim. I apologize. Why do I keep calling you Tim? Because your name's Tim on your thing. So I guess I would like to read it too as honor those who came before you.
Yes.
Rather than just your parental units.
Yes. Yes.
I find that easier. Oh, my mom and dad were cool, but
no, 100%. I mean, I'm here in Wilmington with Gary and Amy, and they parented me when my parents so deeply wounded me. And so, yes, it really isn't about your sanguine or blood father or mother. It's really about those who have parented, who have loved you, who have led, who've been there for you, who have come before you. Yeah, all of that. I think you're exactly right, Lisa. Shall we keep moving? So it's interesting. So I want to say briefly, so the first 4 have conditions. So you shall have no gods before me, 4. You shall not make an idol. And there's actually a reason there as well. I don't know if it's 4. I think it's maybe a because. Anyways, you should not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. 4. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 4. But notice how honor your father and mother is a so. But notice how things shift here, okay? There are no reasons, and thank God, I guess, for no reasons here. So these are principles that I think the second half that exist, without which no organized or healthy society would be able to exist. And I think probably at that time were universally already accepted by most peoples. But I love that they are sort of absolute prohibitions with no explanation, even though perhaps people of faith have not always obeyed them, or maybe made their own conditions to justify them. But These are what they are. You shall not kill. Hard stop. You know? And of course, we have this, and then not long after this, God says, hey, Joshua, go kill everybody and all their children and all the livestock. Anyways, we'll save that for another conversation. But in the Decalogue, at least, in the covenant here that Moses is bringing to the people, the commandment, the prescription, the saying is, you shall not kill. And within the community, there's no for or because or so. You shall not kill. Hard stop. And then in the same way, you shall not commit adultery. Hard stop. No conditions. Although in Leviticus it gets hairy. And then you shall not steal. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And so I love this because all people are really implied in this idea of neighbor or stranger. Anyone within the land is essentially what the context suggests. And this is more concerned with general principles than particular instances. There are no, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor if they, cut your lawn and you're not there's none of that. It's just pretty general principles we're dealing with. And then finally, you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. So I think wife and property, which can be two of the same things in this particular context. So while all people acknowledge killing, committing adultery, and stealing are forbidden, in the ninth, things really do shift to the motive of the heart. Coveting or yearning, desiring, envying someone else's wife or property. And this is really aimed at this state of mind and not action. And we could ask why, but I think it's pretty clear that our inner states influence our outer actions. And this is what Jesus eventually comes to say, like, you have heard it said, but I tell you. And that's what Jesus is doing, is not focusing primarily on the action, but focusing on the inward motivation that shapes or creates the action. And that's really important. And so the Decalogue ends with the words, your neighbor. And Casuto thinks that this, and I say he does because I don't know how I feel about this, but he thinks that that this your neighbor forms a parallel with the opening statement, I am the Lord your God, to reiterate that this is a communal covenant and it's not something just individual between the person and God, but neighbor is part of the community, is part of the covenant, and it all applies therein together. And so these are the 10 sayings or commandments or words or the Decalogue. And there are different ways of organizing these, of combining the Decalogue. There's the Jewish way or ways. There are multiple Christian ways. There are lots. If you ever want to get caught sort of down a rabbit trail, you can look up the 10 commandments and for whom they are 10 commandments and which ones and which applies and what translation, and there's lots of that stuff. So let's keep trucking along here. So as I've said, I think twice already, this is a communal covenant. There are 3 parts of the Decalogue. The first part deals with the God of the community, the Lord your God. The second part shifts with the Sabbath, and it deals with time. And Casuto writes, the one after the other, oh Lord, of the community. So it deals with God, with time, and then finally with space. Yep.
You're going in and out.
Oh no. All right, hold on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're not. You're in and out now.
Can you hear me now?
I thought it was me, but I guess it's not.
Can you hear me?
I mean,
Yes.
he's coming back. He's back now.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm so
doesn't
sorry.
look like you though. Picture 10.
So now we don't see your slides.
How about
There
now?
you are.
All right, I can fix this though, real fast. How we doing?
Good.
Okay.
All right. Doing okay? So
Good.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I know there's some storms in the area. That might be it. But I'm gonna stop my video to slow down some of the bandwidth problems. So, all right. So, did y'all hear me say there are 3 parts of the Decalogue?
And that
Yes.
was about the last thing we heard.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So the first part deals with God. I'm the Lord your God. The second part pivots on the Sabbath, deals with the one after the other of the community, right? So it's not only time in the Sabbath, but it really sets a time of, okay, these are the things that need to happen. This is the order. And then finally, the third part is devoted to space, and it establishes a norm for the mutual relations between its members. So thou shalt not kill actually has some serious ramifications for the community, as it turns out. Not stealing, not envying someone's wife or property or whatever, actually affects how people are to cohabitate space together. And so that's really important. Sorry, give me 1 second here. So Moses is aiming here as the carrier of the covenant, at preparing the community for Yahweh, who has said, I'm ready to be in covenant. This is what I've done for you. And so Moses must provide to Israel a basic constitution, for lack of a better term, in order to make Israel united and firm in itself. And so God's dominion over the people and the inner cohesion of the people are 2 aspects of the same reality. And I want to say that again. So God's dominion over the people, I'm the Lord your God, this is what I've done for you. And the inner cohesion of the people, shouldn't kill, shouldn't steal from each other, shouldn't covet or envy things. These are 2 aspects of the same reality. And Casuto says that these terms, or this constitution of the covenant, sets forth what the relationship must be of the Israelites to the Lord, and what must be the relationship to one another. And so that's another way of saying exactly what I just said. That there are sort of 2 intersecting planes here: relationship with God and relationship with one another as human beings living together in community. So Buber says the covenant entered into between the tribes and Yahweh contains in its very core the covenant into between the tribes themselves. They became Israel only when they became partners in the covenant of God. So for Buber, really, the Decalogue, or these commandments, these sayings, these words, made Israel Israel. So only when Israel enters into the covenant of Yahweh does Israel become Israel. So that's how important it is, because it's not only about how the people are to respond to Yahweh, but it's about how the people are to live with one another in response to Yahweh. Does that make sense? I want to make sure I'm being clear tonight. I don't know that I'm being my clearest at the moment, but there are these 2 intersecting planes, and one is the revelation of Yahweh, what this God has done for the people. And then the second plane that intersects with it is, therefore, this is how we want to live in harmony with one another, knowing that this God did this for us. And so it's kind of this intersection here that in the intersection itself is Israel. This is the formation of a people, and ultimately of a nation. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. So these intersecting planes. So here we find the fundamentals of community life under the rule of God. And then Casuto says, such, the 10 Commandments, such is the lofty ethical plane of the Decalogue. And it was right that this declaration, which forms the preamble to the covenant between Israel and Israel's God, should become the foundation of the spiritual life of all humankind, in accordance with the promise, in you will be blessed all the families of the earth. And that's the promise, of course, to Abraham there. So here we have two intersecting planes. We have the religious, okay, which I like to think of as sort of vertical, and not because I believe God is up there or out there or whatever, but just that makes sense to me. Transcendental, upward, outward, whatever, up and out. Remember that? And then so we have the religious going vertical. Then we have the ethical, which is horizontal. And so these planes are foundational for the other. And Buber writes that if these planes, are regarded in their connection, it will be observed that there are no such separate fields at all here. So no separate fields between the religious and the ethical, but only one, as yet undifferentiated common life. So all that exists is common life, which requires a constitution containing religious and ethical elements in order to achieve a uniform growth. And my friends, that constitution that contains both the religious and the ethical elements toward a uniform growth is the Decalogue, is the 10 Commandments. And so as to summarize, the 10 Commandments are more than you can't do this or you shouldn't do this, but rather they begin with the idea that Yahweh, the Lord your God, brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, is bringing you into a promised land. You are a unique people together. So how are you going to organize and live your lives on the religious and ethical planes, the vertical and horizontal planes that are the same, knowing what this God involved in history has brought you out of? How will you respond? And so here we have this constitution, this treaty, this agreement between the people and a God, and the people and one another. And that, I think, is a timeless paradigm for what it means to be religious or spiritual, or however you want to name that. We have to come to terms with how we understand the idea of the transcendent one or the God or the divine, and how we are to be with one another in such a way that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. All of this is universal, is without condition. And I think that that's what this coming out story pushes us to. It's what the Exodus story, I think, can liberate us into and from. And it is where I want to end my part tonight and open this up for conversation or questions.
I don't know that there's an answer to be had, but so that thy shall not covet, sort of, if you have thy shall not covet and you follow that command, then you wouldn't steal. So thy shall not steal theoretically is unnecessary. And then by that token, I think it would have been better to have a command, thy shall not harm thy neighbor, or they shall not wish harm upon your neighbor, which would be broader and all encompassing, and it would go to state of mind. And then you wouldn't need thou shall not kill, right? And it would be a broader directive. But so I'm curious as to why we had to address state of mind as before stealing, but not state of mind with respect to killing, you know. That's all.
So level of I don't know other word. I don't have good with words, but maturity or reasoning of the writers is a growing thing. So when this was put together, they didn't have the same what you just did. They're coming from somewhere else, and they're not as advanced in that way. is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
They're growing and they haven't grown to that level yet. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah. And there are multiple, and I didn't get into this tonight because it's outside of the Exodus story in the book, but there are multiple sort of iterations of where the Ten Commandments. There's one in Deuteronomy. Like they don't know what came first, and so that's part of the not problem. It's part of the challenge for us. So we think about here in Exodus these 10 commandments. You know, how do we? Yes, growing people, growing understanding, multiple writers. Yeah, it's the perspective perhaps isn't there. And again, likely written from exile. So the context of it is very different, writing an origin story from exile. So yeah, there's lots of historical hurdles and challenges to this story. And Lisa, the one thing I would say in response to your comment is, you know, we see the thou shalt nots, and then it ends with the motivation. So like the state of mind really is sort of the ending point. But I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm here if I misheard you, but I hear you saying like, why wouldn't you sort of question the state of mind like beyond envy and all of this, and like question
Mhm.
the state of mind like before thou shalt not kill, you know, like there's a
Mhm.
particular like why not question the motivation in commandment one with thou shalt not have another
Mhm.
god. It's like let's start there and have
Yeah.
some and question the inner motives versus, is that what you were, did I
Yeah,
get that
I
right?
mean, both as a matter of logic and as a matter of theology, right? So,
Yeah. And I think that's what ultimately, I think that's what Jesus is doing with the
love
you
one
have heard it
another.
said, but I tell you statements, right? Is sort of questioning the logics and the theology of that statement by saying, you know, you've heard it said this, but here's the deal. It's about your heart. It's about like your motivations. It's about, you know, it's much deeper. And I hear the same, and I don't know about y'all in conversations around racism right now. Like racism is much more complicated and insidious than, oh, how you feel about a person of color, you know, like it's not about like how you feel about your, you know, a black person you see on the street or whatever. It's much more complicated than that. It's much more about like the systems of power in which we are embedded, where we pay our money,
Oh, you're
where
going
we
all critical race theory there,
where
Shane.
we eat, how we eat, where we, you know, yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot critical race series got canceled, so can't talk about that. So.
I have a can of worms.
Okay,
Open it, Mary.
open them.
So you mentioned in passing, you said the word worship, and that is a ding, ding, ding for me. And
I
I
said
don't know who
worship.
made up this word and exactly what it means, but lately I have come to the conclusion in my own mind that a good God, any good God, would not require people to worship this God or supreme being. And so that's and I don't know if that says worship is said anywhere, if it comes from pagan gods or whatever, but everything is worship, and it just turns me off.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you.
Wormy, 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 wormy.
Yeah, it's certainly a buzzword. I think for a lot of people it doesn't mean anything because it's used so much. Honestly, sometimes I think the word God, I was talking with someone the other day, they're like, I don't know what God means. Like what does God, like anything can be God. So I think worship, I'm not going to step into now, I'm not going to open that can of worms, but this idea of worship being, A, what does it mean? And B, if a God is benevolent and good, why does this God have to be worshiped? Like, do we have to stroke this God's ego? It's kind of what I hear you saying, which I think is a fair question. I think the word worship in its etymology or origins really just means acknowledging.
Reverence, maybe.
Yeah, it's acknowledging a reverence. I actually think it's worthiness. Just saying that this power or energy or being is worthy of being acknowledged as transcendent or good or loving. And in that way, I'm okay with it. I think as much as we can try to worship. And at the same time, I realize that it's a moving target, and worship gets thrown around so much that I don't know that it really means any of that. It really, like a lot of people, I think, just means singing or praying. And that I think is different.
But I think that the word worship and the notion of worship and worshiping God is quite hierarchical. And I think that people use that idea of worshiping God as like, this is why, Tony Soprano can call himself, a believer in God, despite his inherent evil, because he worships the big Don, right? And so he's good, all's well. Or just like when you said, Shay, on Facebook about this, I have a personal relationship with God, and well, what does that mean? What is that? So you worship God, but what do you do to your fellow humans, right? So
my latest revelation is a relationship with God is a relationship with myself. And if I don't have a relationship with myself, I can't possibly have a relationship with God.
Yes. And this is good because it kind of ties together both of your comments. So where I'm at in my theology, at least in my experiences, is, so we talked about the religious and ethical planes tonight. I really believe that if we're going to throw around the word worship and we're going to if we're going to worship and acknowledge a God, or however you want to name that in your own life and faith and perspective, that cannot be divorced then from how I treat my neighbor. So that's like the religious ethical side. And then I think the third piece of that is how we love ourselves. And then again, sorry to quote this guy named Jesus, but you must love your Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, your mind, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And so it's not only like an intersecting religious ethical plane. I think it's a Trinitarian, it's a third, right? It's God, it's our neighbor, and it's ourself. And I think it's like it's all connected. It's all connected for me. You have so many Christians that think they love God and they don't love their neighbor. It's like, you don't know the hell you're doing, or they don't love themselves. We're so bad at self-loathing or like being in shame or guilt or whatever. And religion can definitely prescribe that. But you're exactly right, Mary. If we don't love ourselves, if we don't love our neighbor, we can never love God. So for me, those three things are like ingredient to what it means to be worshipful.
This is just an aside, a levity. You know that God backwards is DOG, so all the cats revolted, and now they want to call the supreme being TAC.
I've never heard that, but I'm a cat person and I can totally dig it.
Cats would be much more demanding of worship, I think, than dogs too.
So Mary, you don't like that song Waymaker then? All it does is say, I worship you. I worship you.
No, I don't plan on participating in that one.
No. Okay.
I understand. I mean, so much of religious life is it's not just about how we relate with one another, but it really is about the words that we use. And I think that that's something to be, Mary, I really respect you, for that, to say like, no, I'm good. Yeah, I'm gonna.
I could go with the word reverence.
Yeah.
If I had a relationship with God, like I have a relationship with my Aunt Betty, who was my godmother. There's a reverence there.
Yeah.
So I can go with that word because that's somebody that's important.
Yep. Yeah, I understand. I hear you.
I can't see no other way but saying worship.
Yeah.
The way I grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see any other way but to say worship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
my father was a minister. And my mother sang in a choir. And growing up, all we said was worship. And
Mhm.
We didn't really use that in Catholic.
No,
Not in the Catholic
a
Church,
Catholic,
no.
no. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's different. Yeah,
Yeah.
but when I hear people, I don't know.
Yeah. I find myself a lot saying, I give you praise. Like when I pray, I'm like, what does that mean? I give you praise. Like I don't know that I say like I worship you, but I definitely sing it. And again, all of this is language, and being comfortable with language, with how we embrace God is really important. And so I would encourage you, yeah. Like if there's something we say or sing that you're uncomfortable with,
Yeah.
change
Well,
it.
I'm not picking out gather in itself. No, I hear that everywhere.
Oh no, yeah. It's ubiquitous, that kind of language for sure.
And those words of that song, Shay, resonate with me.
Yeah,
But I
Waymaker.
Yeah, because of the words.
Mm-hmm.
And it has healing in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so with my test results coming back, good,
Yeah, good.
I was on pins. I'm always on pins and needles around 3 to 6 months out of my life. Out of a year, I had that blood work done. That's, with me being older now, and having that cancer, he healed me again, that blood work saying,
yep,
nothing's there.
good to go.
Knocking on wood right now.
It's wonderful.
So, but I can't wait to sing that song next Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sunday.
Yeah, that
Can't wait to
testimony,
sing it.
it's powerful. It's powerful. I love that song
I
too.
respect people of faith. I respect people's faith.
Yeah, that's okay. That's good.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable for me.
Yeah, of course.
I understand that. I know.
Yeah.
We're all gathered. We're just all from different backgrounds.
Yeah. And part of the hope of Gather from the beginning has always been, from wherever you come or however you want to name God or not name God or relate to God or worship or don't worship or reverence or don't reverence or give praise or don't, that's all welcome. It's all welcome. We're gumbo, we got all these flavors and these different expressions and all this in a pot, and it's only going to enrich the dish that we're that we're cooking together. So yeah, absolutely. It all belongs. It all belongs. And so our hope has always been that if you're, if you choose to not say something or not, it's all welcome. And there's zero judgment, condemnation, anything like that, because we're all different and we all have a story and a testimony to tell. And that's what we bring to the table, and a table that everyone is welcome at. So, well, friends, I think, I don't know about y'all, but I've greatly enjoyed this. I think we can call it a night. If you're happy to call it a night, is there anything we need to talk about in closing or want to add anything to send us on our way?
Tony has his hand up.
All right, Tony, what's up, man?
I often see this a lot, Shay, even with Tim when he was either Tim or someone else when there was a guest pastor at Pilgrim, and I think it's sort of in pair with the Ten Commandments, where we often hear, "Hey, if you see someone seeking refuge, at least attempt to offer to them, because you were once refugees in Egypt.
You were once refugees too. Yep, exactly. Yes. Welcome the stranger, because you were once a stranger too. A foreigner in a foreign land. That's exactly right, Tony.
Honor thy neighbor.
Yep, that's a great point. All right, friends. Well, I hope y'all have a great rest of your week. Again, those videos Monday, if you can find some time to do those. Sunday will be a great time. I look forward to hearing about the live service, and we'll see you next Thursday. And if I don't see you next Thursday, then we'll see you on the 25th for our Flow July Gather service.
Right.
I love all of you. I pray for you and keep you in my thoughts and my heart every day. And yeah, always look forward to
We
this
love
time.
you
So,
all
Thank
too.
you so much for
Thank
doing it for us,
you.
Shay.
Thank you, Shay, especially knowing that you're on your visit with your friend. So enjoy your visit.
of
Thank
I
you.
course.
almost called you Tim.
with your-
I'm just kidding. You know, I had to say something.
You had
Okay,
to.
bye-bye.
It's all
Good
good.
night.
All right. Bye,
Okay,
y'all.
okay.
Good night.